Eudaimanya, systems and frameworks to improve habits, mind, and life.
Welcome to Eudaimanya. Today we're diving into Nassim Nicholas Taleb's really profound book, Skin in the Game. And look, this isn't just another book about economics or finance. It's a fundamental exploration of risk, fairness, and the kind of hidden asymmetries that secretly govern our modern world. According to the book, understanding this concept will completely change how you look at expertise and responsibility. So let's get right into it. Picture a situation we see literally every single day. You sit down in the evening, turn on the news, and some expert is confidently predicting a massive market crash. Or maybe a politician is passionately arguing for a military intervention halfway across the world. But here's the real problem. What actually happens to them when they're wrong? Well, the pundit just writes a bestseller explaining why no one could have possibly seen the real outcome coming. The politician quietly leaves office and takes a lucrative job at a think tank. But the public? They lose their retirement savings, or they're the ones sending their children to fight. The book highlights this massive human problem. Our society is increasingly run by intellectuals, bureaucrats, and pundits who simply do not suffer the consequences when their decisions go disastrously wrong. We're taking advice from people who risk absolutely nothing. Taleb draws this brilliant contrast to explain the imbalance. Just look at everyday professionals. If a plumber messes up your pipes and floods your basement, he has to fix it out of his own pocket, right? Or his reputation is ruined and he loses his livelihood. He inherently pays a price for his mistakes. He has skin in the game. But compare this to the modern intellectual class, the bureaucrats, the pundits, the interventionists. Over the last few decades, they've built a system that completely shields them from the downside of their own actions. If a policy they push causes an economic disaster, they still collect their paycheck. Their status is totally fine. They've managed to completely sever action from consequence. Section 1. The problem with no penalty. You know, we normally make the mistake of assuming that society gets safer and better just because humans naturally learn from their errors. We kind of just assume that when a politician or a corporate leader messes up, they sit back, reflect, grow smarter, and vow to do better. But the author argues that this is a dangerous illusion. Human learning is incredibly flawed, biased, and honestly, easily forgotten. Systems don't learn because people get smarter. Systems learn by removing parts. Taleb calls this mechanism via negativa, which basically means improvement through subtraction. Think about biology for a second. Evolution doesn't work because animals sit down and figure out how to be better. It works because those that are poorly adopted face the ultimate downside risk, extinction. In the same way, early aviation didn't get safer just because pilots decided to be a bit more careful. It got safer because catastrophic errors, tragically but naturally, removed bad pilots and bad aircraft designs from the system entirely. A system only gets robust when those prone to mistakes are filtered out. If you don't have skin in the game, you bypass this crucial filter. Section 2. The Bob Rubin Trade. So what happens when you bypass that consequence filter? Well, it leads to a very specific, recurring danger. Taleb defines this as the Bob Rubin trade, and it's basically the ultimate catastrophic asymmetry. Here's how the mechanism works. An agent keeps all the upside in the profits when things go right. But when things inevitably go wrong, they transfer all the cost to others, usually the unsuspecting public. Let's ground this in a consequence we all remember, the 2008 financial crisis. Bankers packaged these incredibly risky mortgages and sold them off, collecting multi-million-dollar bonuses. That was their upside. But when those mortgages defaulted and the global economy literally collapsed, did the bankers return their bonuses? No way. They kept the profits. Instead, the government bailed out the banks using taxpayer money. The costs were completely transferred to the public. When decision-makers keep the upside but successfully shift the downside to someone else, the author explains that it guarantees systemic blow-ups. Section 3. Hammurabi and Modern Symmetry. Now, you might be thinking this kind of catastrophic asymmetry is just a modern problem, right? Something born out of Wall Street derivatives and giant bureaucracies. But history shows us otherwise. According to the book, the idea of fixing these imbalances is as old as civilization itself. 3,800 years ago, Hammurabi's code in Babylon established strict symmetries so no one could transfer hidden risks. For example, the code mandated that if a builder constructs a house and that house collapses and kills the owner, the builder is put to death. I know, it sounds incredibly brutal to us today, but the underlying mechanism is profoundly logical. That builder is completely disincentivized from cutting corners. Fast forward to 800 BC with Lex Rhodia in the Aegean Sea, which established strict rules for maritime risk. The ancients deeply understood that risk transfer destroys systems, and they just fundamentally did not tolerate it. So, how do we protect ourselves today from those who try to transfer their risk onto us? The book offers what is essentially the ultimate BS filter. Taleb writes, "Don't tell me what you think, just tell me what's in your portfolio." And actually, let me clarify, he doesn't just mean a literal stock portfolio. He means your life choices, your career risk, your personal reputation. If someone is advocating for a specific city zoning policy, do they actually live in the neighborhood that's going to be affected? True expertise demands that you are exposed to the consequences of your own opinions. If you give advice and someone follows it, you must share in the harm if you're wrong. If you don't, your advice is completely worthless. Section 4. Employees versus independent contractors. Let's shift gears for a second and apply this concept to the corporate world, because the book poses a really fascinating question here. Why do companies hire full-time employees instead of just using a fluid network of independent contractors? Conventional wisdom says, oh, it's just to reduce transaction costs and HR paperwork. But Taleb completely challenges that. He asks, why are employees actually a fundamental risk management strategy? The author explains that the answer is all about downside risk. Independent contractors are exceedingly free. Why is a company terrified of a contractor working on a critical product launch? Because if that contractor gets an offer on a Thursday for double the money on a different project, they can just walk away. The worst they face is a tedious breach of contract lawsuit. But employees, they have a long-term reputation to protect within that firm. They have a career trajectory. They can be fired, lose their health benefits, and face social stigma. An employer isn't just buying labor. They are fundamentally buying dependability by inflicting downside risk. Because an employee has so much more to lose than a contractor, they are far more reliable when the pressure is really on. The book uses a pretty provocative historical anecdote to drive this psychological reality home. Roman families customarily used a slave as the household treasurer, trusting them entirely to manage the wealth of vast estates. Now, why wouldn't they use a free citizen for such an important job? Because you could inflict a much higher punishment on a slave. If a free citizen mismanaged the money, they might just run away or face a civil penalty. But a slave carried the absolute ultimate downside risk. It's a stark historical reality, but it perfectly illustrates Taleb's mechanism. Taking on maximum downside risk guarantees extreme dependability. It controls behavior where mere trust just falls short. Section 5. The power of risk sharing. All right, so we've talked a lot about the problem of risk transfer, but what is the actual antidote and how do we apply it? The author finds the answer in the ancient Greek concept of synkindineo, which roughly translates to taking risks together. This was actually a legal requirement in ancient maritime trade. Picture a merchant ship in the Aegean Sea caught in a massive storm. The ship is taking on water and the crew realizes they have to throw cargo overboard to survive. Without a system in place, merchants would literally fight to the death to protect their own goods, demanding someone else's cargo get tossed. The genius of the synkindineo rule is that if cargo had to be jettisoned, all merchants on the ship had to proportion the costs of the lost merchandise equally, regardless of whose specific barrels went into the water. Everyone shared the risk, which instantly ensured cooperation over pure self-interest. When we apply this principle of symmetry to our own lives, the author shows how it creates massive behavioral benefits. Skin in the game forces things to align. First off, it forcefully reduces the gap between action and cheap talk. Imagine a corporate manager who insists the whole company switch to this clunky new software just because it looks good on their quarterly report. That is cheap talk. But if you force that manager to actually use the software for their own daily work, introducing skin in the game, they suddenly care very much about how well it actually functions. It aligns the consequence directly with the intention and practice with theory. When people are forced to share the risk, their words finally align with their actions. To sum up this entire philosophy, Taleb puts it perfectly: skin in the game keeps human hubris in check. Bearing the risk of your actions isn't just about some abstract sense of fairness. According to the book, it is a highly practical survival mechanism for society. It's really the only true way to understand reality, to filter out the nonsense of self-proclaimed experts, and to prevent systemic ruin. So, as we wrap up this explainer of skin in the game, I want to leave you with a provocative question to chew on. Look closely at the systems, the companies, and the so-called experts around you. Where in your life right now are you paying the price for someone else's mistakes?
If this video was useful, give it a like, subscribe, and share. More systems and frameworks in the next Eudaimanya video.